Hey YouTube, it's Alex, and in today's video, I wanted to cover a topic a commenter recently brought up to me. And in this question, I want to go over some of the things that I do as an introvert to meet new people when I am traveling. Ironically, I do find it easier to meet people when I'm traveling than when I'm in the States, but I want to get into why that is and what I think you can do if you are an introvert to get into more social situations. So the first thing that I'm going to mention here that you may have not considered is that certain hobbies and interests are popular around the world. So I wouldn't necessarily think, like, let's say you're into a certain hobby, that the only people that are into that hobby are in the United States or in the UK or Canada, etc. Some of these hobbies and entertainment interests, music acts, these kinds of things are popular around the world. So the first thing I'd suggest for you to do if you are an introvert, but you do want to meet people in the country that you're headed to, think about your own interests and what you would normally be doing in your home country. Something that I've found that could be kind of comforting for me when I am traveling long term is doing some of the same things that I enjoy doing in the US. Weightlifting is a big one. I find that if I make time and set aside the funds to get a gym membership or at least pay for day passes, then it's really nice, and you actually start to kind of interact with certain people even if you don't speak the same language. It's somebody that you can kind of count on to see in your day-to-day life, and it's possible that if you grow your understanding of the local language, that acquaintance, somebody that you met through something you were already doing or already interested in your home country, has now grown into a friendship, and perhaps they can introduce you to other people that are also into the hobby. Something I will mention here, if you are into a super, super expensive hobby, like let's say you're really into really high end cars, understand that depending on where you're going, there's probably not going to be a scene for that. It's just not likely. Unless you're exclusively traveling in capital cities and upmarket districts, then you're probably not going to find a big scene for that. This is an exception if, like I said, you are traveling in predominantly or only Western countries, only US, UK, Canada, Australia, etc., then obviously those countries are going to have the largest scenes for luxury vehicles. But here in Cusco, I don't see too many of cars like that, and certainly I don't see exotics here. I would not expect to see almost any exotic vehicles here just because they're not practical. It just doesn't make any sense, and the people here are fairly humble, so they're not necessarily looking to have obscene displays of wealth, I think, like some other places. And no judgment on that, but it's just something to consider. Personally, I think high end cars are wonderful feats of engineering, and I think it's mind blowing that humans can create something. They can travel hundreds of miles an hour on land. Uh, anyway, off topic. The next thing I'm going to mention here is give yourself enough time. I find that for me, going to a new country, occasionally the first night is wild, but for the most part, it takes some time to get into the flow of things. It takes some time to kind of understand the layout of the city. It takes time for me to get matches on dating apps like Tinder, and it takes time even of those matches. Some people are, some women are naturally just not going to respond. That's okay. And some women, I may talk with them for a bit, but it just doesn't really lead anywhere. And then next, sometimes schedules don't line up. So if I do find a woman I click with, sometimes it can be challenging to kind of maneuver around our respective schedules. So that's something to consider as an introvert is don't necessarily blame yourself if it takes you a little bit of time to start to meet people, because if you are primarily interested in dating or befriending locals, then you're going to have to, and even this even applies to remote workers or digital nomad types. You got to consider that if somebody's staying in a place long term, it's the perception is going to be that they have a different lifestyle than yours if you're, say, coming for a week, or even if you just arrived, because there's a difference between saying I plan to stay here for 6 months and staying somewhere for 6 months, because some people, they go to a certain place and they find, you know what, I just don't really care for the dynamic. It's too much of this or it's too little of that. And so that's something to consider, is that let's say you're free for your first week, you don't have any work plans for your first week. Well, if you're primarily kind of a daytime person and you want to hang out during the day, then understand that some people, they might be working during the day, or vice versa. If you're a real night owl and you want to spend a lot of time going out at night, well, as an example, right now there's a curfew at starting at 9 p.m. So that's something where if you have a certain idea of doing things, understand that you're going to have to be forgiving for yourself as far as sometimes the way things are set up, it's just not going to line up evenly right off the bat. The next thing I would mention for introverts out there that do want to make new friends, whether they be travelers or locals, is read up on the city. And that sounds easy to say or even kind of obvious, but watch a ton of videos on the specific city you're headed to. Read up on the culture, read up on the history, and understand the important events. Don't necessarily have a controversial opinion on something, but be aware of what's going on, because sometimes these things will come up in conversation. It can be a bit awkward if you don't really understand where they might be coming from. Even if you don't necessarily agree with their perspective, understanding where they're coming from, I find, can be really helpful for me as an introvert. Before I started seeing the lady I'm seeing now here in Peru, I read a lot about Peru. I learned a lot about Peru. I read about the different kinds of things going on here, not just the tourism, but also that there's a large mining industry here. It's a pretty interesting country, but out of 192 countries, it is important in my mind to give individualized attention to specific countries that you might be interested in spending time in the long term. Be willing to try new things. There's a lot of different things that you're going to find in some of the countries you go to that could be quite different than where you're from. So in my case, I grew up in the Midwest, Mid-South region, Tennessee, and in my case, there's not a whole lot to do in Tennessee that isn't kind of manufactured. So in Nashville, it's a popular tourism destination, but most of the things that tourists come to do there are artificial. And some people love that and some people don't. I got a lot out of the music scene. I felt like the Nashville music scene is one of the best in the country easily, and not just for country music, because a lot of people think, oh, you just go to Nashville for country music. But that's not the case. There's all kinds of music that comes through Nashville and the surrounding areas, but some people don't like that. And so let's say I'm going to use a city that gets compared to Nashville a lot, Las Vegas. Let's say you're from Las Vegas and you're used to that. You're used to being able to go to the different entertainment venues. You're used to being able to go to the different buffets. Well, maybe you've never really spent a lot of time at the beach. And I know it's ironic to mention the beach here in the mountains of Peru and talking about a city like Las Vegas that doesn't have a beach, but consider that if you've never tried very many water sports, then, maybe it's worth looking into doing something like that. Maybe it's worth even taking some swim lessons. Maybe you want to develop your swimming skills. And another thing that you might consider is scuba diving. And some of these things are quite risky, so I definitely recommend talking to a licensed, trained, respectable, highly reviewed professional. I urge you caution in some of these things, especially when it comes to the water. The water can be dangerous, as we all know. But I do want to point out that if you're used to a certain amount of opportunities or certain kinds of opportunities, and you're traveling and you're going to be going somewhere that has different sets of opportunities, then it could help you get out of your shell, so to speak. So the next thing that I would recommend to consider doing if you are looking to stay abroad for a while long term is start to stay in more local neighborhoods. That's something where I feel like you get kind of in the rhythm of the normal day-to-day life, and you're not as much considering the tourist zone way of doing things, which may involve waking up at noon and partying all night. While that can be a lot of fun, I know I myself have done that plenty of times myself, plenty of friends have as well. It's not really a realistic way to, in my mind, meet good friends. In the party environment, the main thing that you have in common is you like to party, but if you start to get into interests and hobbies and things like that, you're going to be able to build, in my mind, more genuine relationships with other people. as somebody who values their relationships, I tend not to like to waste a lot of time anymore with people that I don't really care for, and I imagine a lot of you are the same way. But for me, that often involves sort of pre-qualifying people. So I try to think of who are the people that I get along with now, and how did we meet? And that's something to consider alongside some of the things I mentioned before. If you're traveling long term, don't feel like you can't talk to your friends back home. I know in my case, all of my closest friends, or almost all of my closest friends, are immigrants. So they're technically from another country living in the United States. And so often when I'm traveling abroad, it's a comparable experience to what they're having in the United States, because they're typically not from the United States. And so while they work there and they enjoy it, they live there long term, I would certainly be proud to call them fellow Americans. There's still that sort of common ground where, okay, I'm not from Peru, but I've been living here for a bit, and I've probably lived here for a bit longer. And before that in Colombia, I'm not from Colombia, but I spent close to 3 months in Colombia. So in the same way, many of my friends are from India, and so they are having a different experience than somebody from here. And that's kind of what I want to get at, is if you have friends from back home that do share that sort of long-term travel experience, or in the case of my friends, their long-term working experience abroad, then these are people that you could probably have discussions with about your shared experiences. Don't hesitate to hit them up and call them up. I know that a lot of my buddies are really, really busy, but we still stay in contact with messaging, and we have some ideas for trips in the future. So that's something to consider as well. Is you don't have to totally, in my mind, give up your old life to travel long term or to live abroad. You can bring some things from the past to the present. So if you have friends from back home that really like to travel, maybe you guys plan a week or something, or you gals plan a week or so in your area during a time when you're not working. So let's say you're going to do a 6-month trip, and maybe you take a week off at the end of that 6 months, or 2 weeks off at the end of that 6 months, and you do something fun. You can definitely include friends from back home in that. There's nothing wrong with that in my mind at all. So definitely consider that some people in your life will be really curious about what you're doing in a positive way. They'll be really supportive, and they'll be genuinely interested to see what all you are doing, and many of them will also want to participate in some way or at some time. So definitely, as an introvert, I would say it's a good idea, if you're traveling long term, to cut out some of the people that you don't really care for, some of the people you're unsure about, some of the people you don't like. Tell them you're moving away forever, and it suddenly becomes harder for them to try to maintain whatever relationship they have with you that's bothering you. I know of several people that, in leaving in this trip, I definitely cut some people out of my life, because for me, I didn't make good decisions when I was younger. I was always taught that introversion or being quiet is weird, and outgoing is the right way to be. Because my grandmother, she's highly outgoing and highly argumentative. And so she wants other people to be outgoing too, because she enjoys arguing and creating conflict. And you can't really do that as easily, in my mind, with an introverted person who, I mean, for me, I'd rather just not be around people I don't get along with. That's really what it boils down to, is if I don't get along with somebody, rather than trying to get some kind of resolution from arguing or fighting with them, I'd rather just not see them anymore. And so in that case, I am actually, what's the word for, basically estranged from my grandmother, and I have been off and on for about 10 years now, but I think this time is pretty permanent. And so that's something to consider, that if you are an introvert, consider that some of the people that you've been around might be contributing to your shyness, your introversion. Because honestly, like, I've heard that travel and love for travel is associated with extroversion. And so maybe I'm an oddball in this, but I love to travel. So I wonder sometimes if I'm quieter than I would be, just because of life experiences. And so that's something to consider as well. As you may find when you're in your new country, you start to relax over time, you start to slow down, you're not as in a rush, And in some ways, you may feel less self-conscious, or you may be able to think through some of the things that have been on your mind that have been stopping you from wanting to socialize. And you can make friends and develop relationships. And so what I'd suggest there is consider local neighborhoods, presuming that it's a decent local neighborhood. It's going to be safe, because not all local neighborhoods are safe depending on where you go. Then consider that you really will get a better feel for the country, I think, if you spend more time around locals. I don't necessarily have anything against meeting remote workers or remote travelers. Certainly I'll meet some of you along this journey. And I think that it's really valuable and really refreshing, for example, to be able to speak English really, really quickly. That's something that you'll get a thrill out of if you start traveling long term, because sometimes you'll go a week without speaking English unless it's in the context of video or you're meeting up with a friend. And that's what you want to be aware of, is that even though I do suggest checking out local neighborhoods, I do suggest even living in local neighborhoods, that you don't necessarily have to limit yourself to only hanging out with locals. And so if you start to develop a decent mix of friends, both local and expats, then some days you're going to be in the mood to have a hamburger, and maybe most of your local friends are vegetarian. And so that's something where if you have expat friends, then that's something that you could do. You could go and meet up with them and have these kind of Western dishes that aren't as popular among the locals, and vice versa. If some of your expat friends, they mostly prefer to eat American food just for the sake of discussion, and you like the local cuisine, then having local friends, these are people that you can go out and have some of the local dishes with. And so I would also encourage introverts to be willing to not just assume that they need to meet one type of person to have a good experience, if that makes any sense. I have friends that range from highly introverted to highly extroverted, and at different times it's appropriate to hang out or talk with different people. And it's important in my mind too, if you are an introvert, to explain that up front. I tell that to a lot of people. Look, I'm not the most outgoing person as far as how I get my energy, and I feel like that is shifting more toward the middle. I'm becoming a little bit less introverted as I travel more, and this happens when I travel because I find that traveling, if you are an introvert, traveling can help build some self-confidence. And what I mean by that is solo travel, which has been most of my travel. It definitely gives you the feeling that, wow, especially after I've completed some of these trips, I can do this. I traveled in Southeast Asia for almost 4 months, and I've been traveling in Latin America for almost 4 months. No major issues. Really happy. I've planned every step of it. I've chosen the hotels. I've chosen the meals. I've chosen what I purchase in stores, and I've chosen excursions and things like that. And so if perhaps a lack of experience with other people is part of what causes it, because I think there's different reasons for introversion, and I think some of it is genetic, and I think some of it is experiential. And so I would say introverts who are genetically introverted, that part is something that you may not really be able to change a whole lot. But if some of it, not all, but if some of it is from environment, which is the case in my case, then that's something to think about. And that's kind of the way that you would address it in my mind, is think about it like an environmental thing. And part of what's wonderful about traveling for me is it gets me out of the environments where I get in these behavior patterns that aren't necessarily in my best interest. And that's what I really like about being here, is I'm not really confronted with a lot of the toxic people that I used to be surrounded by when I lived in the Midwest and Mid-South. Not everybody there is toxic, but a lot of them are. And that's something that you have to consider if you do start to have these travel plans go well. Well, one of the things that you're going to find that helps them go well is communication. And so there's plenty of times where I did not want to talk to anybody on this trip, or I didn't, and also in the trip to Southeast Asia, but I had to because that was the only way that the situation was going to get resolved. And so sometimes you find that when you are traveling, out of necessity, you will come out of your shell somewhat. And especially, I found that it's important to be assertive when you're traveling because you can sometimes deal with more drastic consequences, I think, when you're outside of your home country. So, anyway, I hope this video has been helpful. I've kind of wanted to answer some of the answer with some of the thoughts that I had on how an introvert can travel in a somewhat social manner and still meet people and still date and still go out, have a fun time, but also give them time to recharge. So, as an introvert and a traveler, schedule days for yourself just to rest and put no expectations on yourself on those days. And I do this too occasionally. I try to work really hard and make use of all of my days, but I at least try to take a partial day where I just chill and eat some food, relax, watch some YouTube. I really like to watch YouTube in my spare time because I feel like it gives me good ideas and helps me improve my own skill set. But that's something to do is don't feel like, okay, this is vacation, I got to go 24/7, because I think sometimes when you shift from short-term travel to long-term travel, like I did in my early 20s, really mid 20s, you want to keep in mind that it's a different pace. And so if you are going somewhere for a week and you're normally pretty introverted, but for that week you're going to party a lot, you're going to go out to the clubs, sure, you might be able to get away with that and not feel drained. But if I tried to do that on a 4-month trip, a month in, I'm going to be done. I mean, I'm going to be burnt out and fried because I didn't have any time to myself to just have reflection and peace and quiet and a relaxed environment. One of my thoughts as far as introversion goes is, and some people just don't understand this, especially some Americans. I don't know why that is, but they don't understand that you're not competing with other people to hang out with me. You're competing with myself to hang out with me. Whatever you have to bring to the table or to offer me has to be better than what I can do on my own. Some people would say that's selfish, but I really enjoy my alone time, and I work really hard to try to advance my position in life, and because I started out at a pretty terrible position, I think, especially compared to many Americans. And so when it comes to that, I like to make good use of my free time to just chill out and recharge. And so as an introvert, you do have to be more selective, I think, when you are trying to make friends. You have to do more filtering. You have to think about where you're going as well, because certain places that are super, super outgoing may just not be for you. You may just find that you just never mesh with the culture. And even if you do like it, it may become a place where you go for vacation rather than a place that you plan to stay an extended period of time. Like, there's certain places that I absolutely love to go on vacation that I would never want to live there. There's certain parts of Florida, for example, that absolutely beautiful beaches, and you have a really big variety of great restaurants, but I'm not necessarily interested in that for months at a time, right? And so that's what I would encourage you to think about, is not just as an introvert, where would I like to go on vacation, or where can I party for a week, but where's a place where I feel like I can enjoy the normal day-to-day life over an extended period of time, not just a visit. Because I'm not going to name names right now, but there's certain countries or places I've been where I loved it the first week, and then I slowly started to really not like it. And then vice versa. There's countries where I really didn't like it the first week, and it grew on me a lot. I'd say the Philippines is like that. The first week in the Philippines, I was like, why does the internet not work? Why why are things out of stock? And I had all these other questions, and then after a week, I was like, "Oh no, I get it. Like these people are amazing." And I've always loved Filipino people, but I definitely felt my patience tested for the first week, and then I slowed down. Right, I had still had some of that American mindset, American vibe, rush, 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 and it usually takes me, to be honest, several months to get out of that mindset because it's deeply ingrained in me. I'm an American. I was born in the United States. I have a lot of love for the country, but not everything is ideal about it. But anyway, more importantly, I just wanted to mention that as an introvert, you definitely don't want to go too much against your own nature. You want to be selfish with some of your time, some of your free time, and make time for yourself to have a quiet meal and enjoy some YouTube or watch. Maybe you're into gaming, play some video games, doing something where you're not on. I feel like when I'm socializing, I feel like I'm on. Like my batteries, the on button is on, and it's nice. I Without socializing, I wouldn't have met the lady I'm seeing, and I wouldn't have met a lot of my friends. But I also have to accept that sometimes I get cranky when I have to do too many days of socializing in a row, and I have to be on too much. So I don't like that. I want to be definitely good to people, and that's less of an issue too. Like I said, I mentioned before that I'm trying to filter out more people and things like that, or have in the last year or so, last 6 months, last 3 months, that as I have better friends, which my friends now are the best friends I've ever had in my life, the most thoughtful, uh, put together, organized, sharp, admirable people that I've met in my lifetime. People that they inspire me to aspire to do better. But that hasn't always been the case, and so the people that I had, some of the people I had in my life that were not good people, I would feel more drained. And so that's something you have to consider, is that if you if you go in with the mindset that you're going to filter well and you're going to research red flags and be careful about who you associate with, you may find that they give you a lot of energy and you enjoy spending time with them more than you enjoy spending time by yourself. I certainly feel that way about the woman I'm seeing now. I enjoy my alone time a lot, but it's really nice to be able to spend time with her, and there's things that I like about spending time with her that I wouldn't be able to have on my own. I don't mean that in a weird way. She's just a generally pleasant person to be around. And so you have to look out for those people that are those rare people that you enjoy spending time with them, uh, to a similar degree that you enjoy to spending time with yourself. So like I said, I hope this has been helpful. Definitely give us a thumbs up. It helps share our video with more people. Comment down below. I love engaging with you all. It's been really cool to see the boost I've gotten from the interview with Mark, and I'm really grateful that he put me on and has shared my channel with so many people. It's been nothing short of amazing. I really am grateful for the opportunity to share my story with you all and to do what I can to help educate people on my own style of travel and my own preferences and way of doing things, and hopefully they can be of value to you. So anyway, I'll see you next time.